Welcome and thank you for checking out this video on Beastars. What we're going to do is have a look at the cinematography and the shot progressions and talk about what makes Beastars such an awesome series. At this point, I also just want to give a shout out to the Canipa effect and their breakdown on Beastars, which look at the technical aspects of what make it look brilliant. Make sure you check that out. I'll leave a link in the description below. But right now, let's get into having a look at Beastars. For anyone who hasn't checked out Beastars yet, definitely look it up on Netflix. It's been an adaptation from the comic book, but from all respects, it's fairly authentic to what the original creation was like. It does have a very unique look and a very unique feel to it, which is what we're going to check out now, but it is beautifully executed and is a fascinating story to actually work through. First thing we're going to take a look at is the thing which I really like about it is the strong color palette. There's always a theme to the color which they've got, and it's consistent throughout the sequences which they throw. The series slowly gets darker and darker to help with the mood of what they're going through. But to start off with, let's have a look at this the frame that they've painted here. One thing which I really love about the things that they do is they've been able to utilize 3D within a 2D look as well. It's definitely a style they've chosen for, but in something like in this shot here, we're looking at the use of, there's a couple of things I want to just point out in this. The first thing I want to talk about is the use of circles. They've really been able to use a lot of strong circular motifs to help drive and draw your eye, which is something which isn't utilized that much outside of most 2D. Drawing circles and ellipses in 2D and making camera moves in 2D is a lot of really hard work. But what they've been able to do, since they're using a blend of both 2D and 3D, they've been able to utilize this technique to help drive your eye to the place that they're wanting you to look at. For this shot, as you can see, all the circles really bring you around to the center point and the fountain, which is nice. And it's also a distraction from the leading point which they're after, which is these guys, who are hiding in the shadows. The other thing which helps tell the story within this shot is the light that they've used. The sunlight they have is definitely lighting up all of this shape out here and along the footpath. If you look at what's well lit, everything down here is really, really consistently well lit. But then you've got the big dark square, which is a shape into itself that's different to everything else. Because like we said, we've been talking about circles, circles and more circles. But the building is a square, and then inside the square, inside the shadows, in here, is another beautiful frame inside a frame, but everything here is in shadows or in darkness, and that draws our attention from the center point, 1, 2, 1, 2, framed up within the center of this sequence of squares. We have our main point of focus, which is balanced out equally and opposite to our circle, which is over here. So a beautifully balanced frame by everything that's leading your eye around, well lit and focused on the points of distraction. But one thing Beastars is incredibly good at is frames inside of frames. We've got two characters confronted by one character inside this. And what we can look at, or what we can see from this, is that our two characters is balanced inside this square here. So they've got their own frame inside this, and yet our main character, which we're looking at, also has his own framing with the pillars which they've used here as well, to give him a border frame too. Now the main character which we're looking at, or the one that draws your most attention, is the one which has his light lit right behind him. Since he is only the one character in this shot, and he still needs to hold a dominant stance against this. There's a lot of themes inside this movie about dominance and who has the power within this, prey or predator or prey. And since we're looking at wanting the prey to have the power, he's the one that has the light behind him to be able to drive him. And he himself is in the shadows. But our two dominant characters on the other side of frame, who are the ones being scorned and looking down, they've got all this dark shadow behind them, which holds them into this spot and really compresses them over this side of the frame. Yet they do have the soft light leading in from outside. So we've got the real harsh sunlight, we've got the soft light which seems to reflect off the characters, we've got our main character who's the dominant one in the dark shadows, but he's got the rim light around him to make him highlight that he is the only one there. The one thing which I do find a little bit interesting within this frame is in the background back here is this square building with this, again, square light, which leads, all the leading lines lead you down to this point of light. And I did love this shot, which is in the same sequence. Again, they've used these yellows, consistent framing yellows in here. I found this a very interesting framing. First of all, we're right down on the ground. So the camera itself has been pushed down on the ground, and the lens that they've used is really, really wide, which gives us these weird warpy edges around the building. When we look at the building edges, the camera's got a bit of a tilt to it, which gives us a straight line here, but it's not straight. All the pillars seem to be just tilted a little bit, all the way down until we get down here. So we've got this power over this side. We've got our thirds line. When we chop off our thirds line, we've got our main characters are high on the top third and our secondary characters are on the bottom third. We've got the main characters off in framed in a spot all by themselves, which is beautifully executed. I love these pillars, and it's one of the things which they constantly do throughout the whole series is make sure there is a clear frame which the characters or the main characters or the main point of action is being held within. So we've got a clear frame, we've got a clear frame that they're in inside the picture. They've got the darkened background behind them. If we look at it, they are standing in the shadows and being lit by the light. The interesting one which I find within this particular scene, while all our characters are down, all our extra characters are down here on the bottom third, they had an interesting problem which they were working with. Then the problem is the sunlight which they've picked, or the main source of light over here, is sending light in a direction straight onto our main characters, which lights up the environment really well, lights up all these front lines and the steps and our characters and puts the characters in the shadow in the background. But what it would have also done, unfortunately for them, is thrown all these secondary characters. If we look at the shadow on the main characters up here, there is a real strong shadow in their back half of each character. So that would have meant that all of our secondary characters on the bottom should have had shadow in the front of them. But as you can see from this, the shadows do not fall down the same direction as what they do for our main characters. The shadows for the secondary characters on the ground, you can see that they're actually all being lit by a light which magically seems to be reflecting off the front, so that all of the front of these secondary characters are all lit. Very, very interesting how that they've just been able to manipulate their light so that these characters are all lit, and yet the main source of light which they have is this up in the sky where the sun is, and yet all these characters are lit secondary. Then the use of these blues. I love this sequence as well. Like, to start off with, the horizon line itself way up in the background back here. The horizon line is beautiful and flat, yet it's a very clever idea to then turn all the angles of the buildings so that they're leading off into the distance. Not to your center point like here, but they're actually all their vanishing point lines are all off in the top third over here, which gives a very dynamic perspective for all these square lines which we've just come from. We've come from a sequence of circles. We've all of a sudden got all these square angles. And just to make this frame a bit more interesting so that we don't have a flat square or a linear square sitting down the front here leading off to the center point, they've made their vanishing point way off in the distance over on the left or over on the right. And it's really nice. And as we've gone with colors before, a thing they do quite often within their colors, they make sure that whatever they're wanting to really push is their main character, where all the action is taking place, is hidden down in the bottom of the pool in shadow. So they're keeping their character in shadow because he is a shadowy character. You know, he's someone who's avoiding being the star. And he usually is walking in the shadows, and the whole series is about his coming of age. But you'll find that he's always really nicely placed within a frame. If we look at his placement within a frame as well, he actually becomes just off dead center. He's actually just below dead center in frame, but he's placed in the shadow of a shot inside this shape. So the shape leads you up to where he's hiding, which is beautiful. I really love their close-up framings that they do as well. Their close-ups, again, if we look at we do something very basic about thirds. We look at thirds. He's lined up nicely. Both characters are lined up nicely on thirds. We've got one guy who has his eyes above the third, but his shoulders are on the third, leading to the main character who has his eye dead center on this left third. So they keep this looking nice and balanced by having really close-ups, which is not something you see that often, these nice profile close-ups with the main character in the background. Thirds are really clean balance lines for when you're framing up a shot, especially when you're just doing a nice two-shot. It's very easy to just go one's on one third, one's on the other third. But the way that they've put their secondary character's eyes are higher in frame than the main character, and the main character's eyes are in the dead center. It just gives them, like, when you see these characters stand next to each other, there's no way that they would actually sit next like this within the frame, but they've positioned the camera to have his eyes higher on the third. The big thing that happened with this shot when I really liked was looking at the negative space between these two characters. You've got this big negative space between them. So they've really kept a separation. Like, there was a couple of reasons all the way down the bottom. If you look at it, their negative space, they've kept them apart within the frame. Something I really appreciate when they're actually doing this is framing up like this, that they've kept this negative space between the two. Now, what that's done when you actually do that between the two shots is it's given you almost a perfect cut point for this character then, as they cut between him, to sit between that negative space. I thought this was really, really well done, and if it wasn't completely and utterly intentional, it definitely should have been, because he fits perfectly within that negative space that was there. Just with going on with the sequence between these two guys as they talk, as I was saying before, there was no way from this previous camera shot where they had where his eyes were on the different level, where his eyes were higher. As you can see them as they sit down on this wall here, you could see that the camera was on a weird angle looking down on top of them to get his eyes above it. Otherwise they wouldn't have been able to get that frame. But here again, we've gone for these guys on an angle. Like, this is one thing I really love. There is no flat, it's not a square frame. There's a running angle off to the right. So we've actually made the character bigger again. And then between this shot and the next shot, watch again the negative space between them. As we go down here, and the negative space has got bigger, and those characters have shrunk in shot, but they're still in the same position within where they were. And again, those, we look at the framing of these angles. We've got beautiful angles again, so it's definitely not a flat picture. It's very interesting to look at with the leading lines that lead you around and around in this frame, but they all end up leading you back to the characters. And as we go in with the sequence, it was really nice that they've gone from the two shot where they chopped off at the knee to a wide shot with both of them talking in the background, to actually help amplify then when they go into the close-up for the emotional moment. And I really like that this particular frame that they've done, if we put it down the center, we've got our character on one side of the frame with a big negative empty space on the other side. It really does make him feel isolated and alone, but it's still a beautiful shot. Then from the previous shot of close-up to a close-up when he's moved away, we've gone closer to him, but you look, he still takes up a perfect half. It's like you're getting two distinct different thoughts about our main character as he travels through his through the episodes. He's now gone from a blue light to the red light, or an orange light, but he's gone from one side of the frame to the other. Another technique they use a lot within Beastars is the comic book style split screen. I really love how they've got their distinct split screen between here to help tell the story about these guys looking down, or this group of characters looking down on our character, and they've put her eye dead center within the frame again. So if we look on thirds, her eye lines up on the thirds. This main character's on the third. Her eyes are above the third. And she's looking down on our character across this side of the frame. All of them are looking down on her within the frame. But when you actually, it makes a beautiful frame that we've got here, and it really tells the story of the power struggle that these characters are in or between. But when we put it between the shots that it's come through, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I really love, as I've talked a bit before, frames within a frame, we see that all the architecture always has something to help the guys frame up their characters. The ground, again, they're not afraid to put the camera way, way down on the ground, as you would within a comic book frame. Their feet are just off the ground. If you look at that, there's not very often you'll find feet that close to the bottom of a frame. So they're really pushing the framing to get these characters in. But frame within inside a frame, we've got the pillars, which give these guys a distinct off by themselves feel. And then we've got our main characters on this side who have all this yellow box which surrounds them. It's really interesting to watch the shadows in this. The technical aspects of their shadows is brilliant. Definitely check out the link in the description to hear more about the technical aspects they were facing with these shadows. It's really quite amazing to see how they overcome it. So with the lens in here, you can see by the we can see by the shape of this post, they've really gone for a wide angle lens, which makes these characters who are standing up look very dominating because they are bending over top of us when we look at them. And our main character here, she's got a space all to herself. There's nothing crossing over her lines anywhere. She's got this whole space here with nothing breaking her line except this on her tail. So she's got all that space to stand up in, whereas we look at the lines that these guys are broken up by. There's the roof rafters that run through here. There's the pictures on the back wall which are breaking their line. There's the post itself which is breaking their line, and they've got this sunlight over here which is also breaking their line. So they're a group, but they're a fractured group, yet our main character who we're focusing on is definitely strong all to herself. So that is just a look at some of the amazing frames inside Beastars. I totally enjoyed it. I totally enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. So if you have not yet seen it, definitely check it out and let me know in the comments below if you guys love Beastars.